Hey everyone, welcome to the Seattle Coffee Gear YouTube channel. I'm John. Today we're going to be talking about pour overs and scales and why it's important to use a scale when making pour overs. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to our channel if you're in the middle of shopping for coffee gear. We're always putting out new videos, and subscribing is the best way to be notified when those videos come out. Just to make sure we're all starting from the same place, let's talk about what a pour over is. The term pour over usually is referring to making coffee by hand with a kettle and some sort of pour over device like this Kalita Wave I have here. It's a more manual way of making coffee that allows you to have more control over the brewing process and ultimately more control over how your coffee tastes. Pour over brewing does take a bit more time than just using an automatic drip brewer, but I find it extremely gratifying when I make a pour over and taste that coffee. It tastes great, and I know that was me who got it to that point. A scale is something we'd consider an essential when making a good pour over. One of the crucial aspects of making a pour over is knowing the ratio of water to coffee. That ratio affects extraction and concentration. Those are two big terms you'll hear as you're getting more into coffee. Concentration, or the strength of the coffee, is exactly that. It's how much coffee is dissolved in that water, and that determines how strong the coffee tastes to you. Extraction is also related to the amount of coffee that's involved, but you'll often hear of things being under or over extracted. An under extracted coffee is something that tastes sour or overly acidic, whereas an over extracted coffee will oftentimes taste burnt, bitter, or harsh. Knowing the amount of water you're using allows you to get repeatable results for both concentration and extraction. A quick and easy way I use to remember those two terms is concentration is how you're tasting the coffee, and extraction is what you're tasting. Starting off with the pour over process, first you need to figure out what pour over device you want to use. My go-to is usually the Kalita Wave in this stainless steel version. I find it to be really forgiving, but also gives good clarity of flavor, and I just like the way it looks. I have one hanging on a shelf with all my coffee cups, and it looks pretty nice. There are tons of different pour over methods that you can use. There's V60s, there's Chemex's, the Kalita, and dozens of others that you can see on our website. There's a link in the description showing all of those pour over methods. Once we have our pour over device selected, the next step in my process is to choose the coffee you want to use. The exact coffee that you're going to use depends on your personal preference, but I'm always a fan of trying something unusual that maybe pushes your boundaries and gets you out of your comfort zone. The coffee I'm going to be using for this pour over is our collaboration with Brandywine Coffee Roasters out in Delaware. This is like a medium to light roast blend. If you're not as comfortable with light roast coffees, this is a great way to get into those more complex, lighter roasts. Go with something that's still a blend, but is leaning toward that lighter side of the spectrum. We have lots of good staff picks on our website, so be sure to check out that link in the description. The focus of today's video is pour overs and how scales affect making a pour over. We have three options here for scales, just to show that it's important to pick the right scale for the style of coffee you're making. Here today we have the Akaya Pearl, we have the Rhino Coffee Gear Stealth Espresso Scale, and the Fellow Tally Scale. Not all of these scales are ideal for making pour over. While you could use the Rhino Stealth scale for a pour over, it might be a little bit small, especially if you're using something larger like a Chemex. While the Tally and the Pearl are both great options, personally, I have the Pearl at home. I've had mine for 6 or 7 years now, and we love it. We use it for everything from baking to cooking to coffee to cocktails. It's one of the most used pieces of equipment in our kitchen. It's been a worthwhile investment for us. Now that we've talked about what pour over device we're using, what coffee we're using, and what scale we're using, let's talk about the grinder for a second. The grinder is a very important part of making a pour over. A good grinder will give you evenly sized particles of coffee so that the water can interact with all of those particles evenly. That means you have predictable extraction, which leads to consistent results in the cup. A few last parts of the equation will be the amount of coffee you're using per the amount of water you're using. Today we're using the larger Kalita Wave, which I typically use to make 12 to 16 ounce cups of coffee. Next up, once you know the amount of coffee you're going to be making and the amount of water you're using, is a bit of math. That's the brew ratio, or the ratio of water to coffee. Most people like a ratio of somewhere around 1 part coffee to 16 parts water. You can calculate that out to figure out how much coffee you can use, or a scale like the Tally will actually convert that for you and tell you how much water to use based on how much coffee you added. Now that we've talked about all these different aspects, let's put it all together and make a cup of coffee. A quick way that I use to convert ounces to grams or milliliters is just multiplying the ounces by 30. It's not perfectly accurate, but it does a decent enough job to get you there. So I'm going to be using 360 grams or milliliters of water, and dividing that by 16 gives me 22.5 grams of coffee. I got 22.6, that's close enough. Let's go ahead and grind our coffee. Before starting your pour over, make sure to rinse your filter so that you don't get any excess papery taste in your coffee. Now that my filter is rinsed, I can add my ground coffee. This is also a good time to double check your weight and make sure you have the amount of coffee you think you do. I have 22.5 grams, so let's start by blooming the coffee. Blooming the coffee is the process of adding a little bit of water at first. Usually it's about 1/10 of your entire target weight, and that displaces a lot of the trapped gas inside the beans, allows that to escape, so then additional water can get in and extract the sweet and bitter components of the coffee. The gas portion of the coffee is typically attributed to more of the acidity and the sharpness that you'll find in coffee. Once you pour that initial 10% of your total volume, you'll want to let the coffee sit for about 30 seconds to allow the water to do its job. My total target time for this is about 3 to 4 minutes for this size of serving. 30 seconds is up, so let's start adding some more water. I try to fill up the pour over device about 2/3 of the way full to about 3/4, and then I'll let that kind of dwell and draw down for a bit. I'll also return my kettle to its base here to help it gain some temperature back. These fellow kettles have a nice hold setting that'll keep your water at its desired temperature. As I'm pouring water in, I'm making sure to cover all the sides of the filter to make sure I'm pushing any grounds that are stuck to the edge of the filter back into that solution to make sure everything's getting extracted evenly. Adding water slowly over time like this helps the coffee solution stay at a nice consistent temperature as well. Well, that took me up to right about 360 grams, which is my total target weight for the amount of water I'm adding to this. So now I'm just gonna wait for this to draw down and finish brewing. All right, let's pour some coffee and see how it tastes. Just looking at it, it seems like it might be a little bit on the lighter side. And so if I wanted to increase my extraction or concentration, I could use more coffee to decrease that ratio, maybe use 1 part coffee to every 15 parts water. I could also grind a little bit finer, and that would increase the amount of extraction I'm getting. And tasting it, it is a little bit tea-like, which would lead me to think that I could have used a bit more coffee, but I do get a lot of that chocolatiness, some of those cherry notes, and the nuttiness as well. This is a tasty coffee as pour over. If you haven't tried it, I'd recommend giving it a shot. Well, that wraps up our guide on all things pour overs, scales, why you should use a scale when making a pour over, as well as some options that you could consider if you don't already have a scale. Leave us a comment down below about your favorite style of coffee or a hack you like to use when making a pour over. If you're looking for your next piece of coffee equipment, make sure to sign up for our email newsletter. We're always sending out information about new products, sales, promotions, all things coffee. You can do that through a link in the description, and as a thank you for signing up, we'll also send you a code for 10% off one item. There are exclusions to that code, so be sure to chat with our sales team about any questions you may have. As always, thank you for watching and supporting the channel. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something. Hope you have a great rest of the day and keep making coffee you love.